welcome to another episode of Building Prosperity with Commercial Real Estate. I'm your host, Gary Tsungu, and today on the show, we have Lloyd Birnbaum. Lloyd, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure, Lloyd. It's definitely a pleasure, and it's been a long time coming. Now, Lloyd, you have over 30 years of experience in practicing law and looking at legal issues through the eyes of a business client. Lloyd Birnbaum is a business law boutique offering general counsel, big firm services, and sophistication with over 20 business lawyers. Now, in addition to your law degree, you have an MBA in finance from NYU, and your practice focuses on representing clients as outside general counsel in all aspects of their businesses. Now, clients typically seek advice with strategic legal and business planning for new and expanding businesses in both private and public. Now, you also have counseled over 300 clients. That's impressive, in raising capital and negotiating joint ventures, negotiating major contracts, and pretty much every aspect of real estate. In particular, development, acquisitions, leasing, and financing, with a total of over $2 billion worth of transactions throughout your career. Now, I know that intro probably won't do you any justice, because we would need an entire series just to go over your expertise, which is another reason why I'm very thankful to have you here. But like I said, your resume is nothing short of impressive. So before we dive in, looking back at your journey, this probably wasn't something that you had your eye set on. And what I mean by this is real estate or just the law in general. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started in the industry?
Sure, I'm happy to. Like you mentioned, I have an MBA in finance, and when I graduated from NYU, I went to work for Citibank in New York in commercial banking. And before I graduated from business school, I had decided that at some point I was going back to get a law degree. But I thought that when I started practicing law that I would be a business lawyer, but I didn't realize at the time that I had a passion for real estate. That came about a little further down the road. I guess I was a first-year lawyer, and I had an opportunity to work in different departments of a big law firm. And I spent 4 months in the real estate department at a time when things were very busy in the economy. I started in late 1987 and got involved with some major projects over my first 5 years. I was involved with the development of an office tower complex in Center City, Philadelphia, known as Liberty Place. And that project had 2 office towers, an urban mall, and a hotel, and a parking garage, all part of it. And that was my first introduction to real estate in a law firm setting. I enjoyed the classes that I took in law school and in business school, but I really didn't have the passion for it until I actually saw a project and I saw cranes coming out of the ground. That got me going. Mm-hmm. Along that first 5-year path, also worked on the development of what's now known as the Wells Fargo Center in Philadelphia, where the Philadelphia 76ers and the Philadelphia Flyers play their games, and where we go to see concerts and other great events. It was a very exciting time. I was part of the demolition of an old stadium that was there, RFK Stadium, and for the development of this new entertainment complex. That all happened within a 5-year period. At the same time, I was working on much smaller matters. Some matters were very discrete, boundary dispute, or the purchase and sale of an office building or a hotel, or the refinancing of a portfolio of mobile home parks. These were all types of transactions that I worked on, and got my feet wet and get started in real estate. And it really became a passion for me. So much so, I realized that one of the reasons that I really enjoy real estate is I like to help people reach their goals. Since I was a kid, since I was a Cub Scout, I've always been out there looking to help people achieve their goals. It makes me feel good. I feel successful when I am helping other people achieve success. And that's an exciting thing for me. And sometimes that goal is to develop a shopping center, or that goal is to exit the market. I recently represented someone who, after 35 years of being in business, represented him on the sale of his business to a private equity fund. And the business had two pieces of real estate. And we did that as a separate deal. And it was a big day for my client after he sold the business and then sold the real estate. He was out from under it. And that was what his goal was, to enjoy the rest of his life free of his business. Sure. He achieved that. I felt very happy for him.
Let that be a testament to your success. I mean, it sounds like one of the main reasons why you've achieved the success that you've achieved and gotten to where you are today is because you're happy doing what you're doing. And 9 out of 10 times, if you're sort of dragging your feet to work, you're not going to get to the level that you're trying to aspire to get to. But I want to backpedal a little bit and talk to you about when you first started at your first firm, kind of try to identify what it was that sort of excited you and what motivated you to continue to pursue real estate. You said that you were 4 months. You worked for, was it 4 months that you worked at a real estate firm?
So it was a big law firm. As a first-year lawyer, I had the opportunity to pick 3 departments to spend some time in, to see where my interests may be, and to see the interests of those in the law firm as to where they could see me fitting in. And it was a perfect match. The month that I spent in real estate, I learned a lot, and I clicked with the people. And I felt like every day there was something new to learn, and every day I did learn something, and that was exciting. That was really exciting. And plus, to see the projects coming up out of the ground, as I mentioned, that got me going with real estate.
Now, regarding, so you also said that you had a 5-year, your role at the law firm was about a 5-year period. Is that the same law firm?
Same law firm. I stayed at the first law firm for 5 years, worked on great projects, learned a lot about development, a lot about leasing, a lot about finance. Went through a period where there was some turmoil in the markets, and so I got to experience some workouts and things of that nature. But after 5 years, a client hired me to go in-house and become a general counsel. And I was general counsel at a real estate development company for about a year. And I left it because I missed the practice of law. I missed having diversity of products, of real estate products. And I missed having diversity of clients. I'd like to have a mix. And the development company, I was developing one type of product. It was a shopping center product. It was interesting and it was exciting, but at the same time, I missed what I was doing in the big firm world. So I left. Yeah. I left the development company. I probably should have stayed. I probably could have been a very rich man if I stayed. But I pursued my passion, which at that point had become being a lawyer, being a real estate lawyer, being a transactional business lawyer, being an advocate, being a counselor to my clients, and helping them, as I say, helping them succeed and reach their goals. So I went back to a larger law firm this time that was international in scope and more corporate. And I'm in a boutique law firm now. I mean, I was in a law firm with 1,500 lawyers. My law firm has 20 odd lawyers today. And I take the same interest in teaching the young lawyers all about real estate.
Yeah. Now it seems like you excel in difficult situations by the sound of it. You started off in a law firm that had 1,500 lawyers, and one of your first projects that you had to redevelop was a Wells Fargo center. And that was, now, I mean, after you had started, so you graduated, and how long between the moment where you had graduated to the moment that you had to redevelop the RFK Stadium?
So it was about a year and a half into my practice. I was approached by a partner who said that he needed my assistance for a major project where we would be demolishing RFK Stadium in Philadelphia, and in its place, developing a new arena, which today is known as the Wells Fargo Center. It's had many names because there have been many bank acquisitions.
Right.
But as part of the development, in addition to the real estate development, was the whole naming rights. It was at the outset of naming rights before arenas around the country were being, and stadiums were being named after corporate America sponsors. It was at the beginning of that. So it was interesting and exciting.
One thing that I wanted to ask you, that's a really big project, even for sort of anybody. It sounds like you're really, really good at what you did for you to sort of take on a project like that, or you were fearless, whatever adjective you want to use to describe you at the time.
You know what, Gary? I'm going to interrupt for a second. I think that for the most part, I'm super curious. And by being curious and having a passion, I get into it. I get into it. Now, I was a junior person on the team. I was working with a senior partner who taught me a lot about development, taught me a lot about public relations. We were in the newspaper. Our transaction was in the newspaper on a regular basis. We had our spin doctors, so to speak, who would place things in the news that was advantageous to the negotiations that we were undertaking. It was an incredible education, not just on the technical real estate aspect of it, but in big business in general. I'll be forever grateful to the team that I was part of for educating me in this process.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really steep learning curve, if I've ever heard of one or ever experienced one. Now, speaking of learning curve, and kind of try to switch gears to real estate a little bit, what were some things that you learned there some lessons that you learned there that you still apply to this day when it comes to redevelopment?
I learned to rely on myself, to ask questions, and to not be afraid to let my creative energies flow and adapt. Here we were developing a new arena in a city where change wasn't always welcome. People liked things the way they were. There was a gentleman's agreement in Philadelphia that no building would be taller than William Penn's hat. William Penn, as we know, was the first governor. He founded Pennsylvania, and his statue stands on top of City Hall. So there was this gentleman's agreement that no building would be higher than William Penn's hat. And that during my first 5 years in practice, when Liberty Place was developed, we saw that gentleman's agreement broken. It no longer applied, and the skyline of Philadelphia changed.
What was one of the reasons why they broke that gentleman's agreement?
A vision of what the city could be, a vision of the city moving forward instead of standing still, a vision of office towers and hotels, an economy that was able to generate so much more in terms of gross product than what they had before. The synergies from building a business district with office towers really changed the landscape in real estate in Philadelphia.
How was the entitlement process for that? I know that a lot of developers have a hard time. There's a political component when it comes to development. You got to have having relationships in the city is definitely a bonus. Knowing some people in the city is definitely a bonus. And for those inexperienced developers or developers that don't necessarily have the track record, it's a lot more difficult for them to get those approvals and those building permits and entitle the land to what their vision is and what they're trying to build. What was some of the pushback that the city was giving, or was there no pushback because there was that vision?
And good question, Gary. Good question. I have found that with projects like Liberty Place, which was 2 office towers, a hotel, and an urban mall, and a parking garage, and projects like the Wells Fargo Center, those projects had a lot of public support. So in terms of entitlement, yes, there were many approvals that had to be obtained. As a matter of fact, for the Wells Fargo Center, the whole zoning code needed to be rewritten with respect to a stadium district. It didn't exist before. So new rules were written, and the public sector was excited to see the development go on, and worked with the developers, really very much so helping shape what was needed to accomplish the development. Unlike in so many other developments I've worked in over the years since then, where community opposition is sometimes difficult to overcome. I remember one project was the redevelopment of a shopping center in a suburb, and we needed the community support to do the redevelopment. And there were some neighbors who had bad experiences with the property that needed to be redeveloped. Noise, people hanging out loitering at night, lights coming into their windows, things of that nature. So there were, to obtain the entitlements, we had to come to terms with the community group, and that involved concessions, and concessions typically involve money for the developer. But in exchange, we ultimately had the support of the community. You can get projects through without the support of the community, but it can be long. It can be a long process, and it can be expensive process, and it can be a litigious process. Engaging the community to educate them on the benefits. People have, not in my backyard, the phrase NIMBY. People don't want things in their backyard, but when they're educated about the benefits, they can make a better choice. And so working with communities in terms of getting entitlements can be it's a fundamental part of the approval process that can't be overlooked.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's one of the many pushbacks that developers have experienced time and time again, where they have to work with the community. I'm currently negotiating a project out in Washington, getting the neighborhood on board with the project and getting them to be okay and getting their approval. It was one of the biggest things that we had to overcome, one of the biggest obstacles we had to overcome. However, it mitigates a lot of the risk when it comes to getting that neighborhood approval. This is a really good segue, because I want to talk to you about some of the difficulties that developers experience from a legal standpoint. I'm sure you've worked with a lot of experience you've represented over 300 clients. And what I want to ask is, aside from the entitlement process that developers have to work with and having to work with the city, what are some legal issues or legal problems that you're seeing the issues that inexperienced developers are facing? And then tell us a little bit about even the problems that experienced developers might face.
Some of the problems are the same. And real estate developers are traditionally visionaries, and they can see things 7, 8, 10 steps down the road and actually see the finished project. They can picture that. That obviously that changes over time as you go through the process with architectural and engineering and how project lays out on a particular site. But things that are common are not having a good enough plan, or not having a plan. Not having a plan. The plan helps you in many ways. Not only you focusing on the steps, but the timing of the steps. If you want to develop in a way that will let you start collecting, if you're going to own, let you start collecting the rent sooner rather than later. In states like New Jersey, it could take years to develop a gas station. One of the popular brands in this part of the country and down in Florida is Wawa. And to develop a Wawa, it's a super gas station. It's a convenience store. It's not a sit-down restaurant, but a takeout restaurant. and gas station. And one of those projects in New Jersey can take you 3 years. And that's if you plan, that's if you plan it well. You know, your timing, your sequencing of getting approvals is really important. And there are many approvals that are dependent upon others. I need this approval before I can go for that one. But then there are other approvals that can be set out on parallel tracks to obtain. It's important that you have a good plan in place so you don't stumble over the timing, because a bad plan will cost you more money to develop, or could cause a project to fail. Building a good
when
team.
You say, so, okay, the team is crucial, and I really want to get into that, absolutely. But when you say plan, what do you mean by plan exactly? Like how would you get an inexperienced or an experienced developer sort of? I know that there is no matrix, there's no blueprint, because every single project is different, and every single project has its own difficulties, and every single, even different asset classes have their own difficulties and nuances. But when you sort of discuss a plan, what are some things that they can do to plan better?
Well, the developer will have a vision of what she wants to do with a particular site. At a point early on, there should be, and this goes back to the team building, the developer should have meetings with the team so it can be understood what approvals will be needed along the way. And that team would consist of a surveyor, a land planner, engineer, depends if there's wetlands, whether or not you need an environmental engineer, architect, and a finance person. And probably someone who has their pulse on the market. If it's going to be a project that's going to be leased up, their pulse on the market of what's hot, what's current, and what rents can be obtained for the project, so that early on you can build a pro forma that makes sense. And by building that team early on, you are not only you able to build the timeline, but you're able to build the budget. And I think that's where some developers need a little bit of help, especially younger developers, in building a realistic budget. And things always cost more than you're first told. It just seems that to be the case. Maybe people give you a low price because they want the work, but things always tend to cost a little bit more. Which brings me to another point. Besides planning, timing, and building a good team, I think that part of the plan is your capital raise. I have one client who, I guess he thrives on this, but he doesn't have a good capital plan from the outset. He knows that he's going to need to borrow a certain amount of capital, and that the rest of it is going to be raised through equity. But how he raised it through equity, it can, in the course of a transaction, can take many twists and turns. So for this particular developer, he's not set with a group of investors from the start, or sufficient capital of his own to fund all the equity. Along the way, in a project that might have 4 phases to it, he might have 4 different partners that he partners up with while he is mid-deal, while he's still putting the deal together. So his plan is taking shape. There's a saying for this. He's flying in an airplane as he's building it. He's building it. He doesn't have a solid plan. He has experience he can draw upon. But I have found that the method to his madness eats into his profits. He could be more profitable if he was more organized. But I suppose you could say that about a lot of people, Gary. A lot of business people.
Yeah, absolutely.
If they're more organized, that there'd be more profits for them.
For sure. And it's not just the profits, the only thing that he should be worrying about, he or she, and not just for their own profits, because it's one thing to sort of worry about your own profits. And let's say during the project, you lose money. But if you're going out there and raising capital from private investors, whether they're retail or institutional, you have to, now you're playing with other people's money, right? It's the way to scale up, and it's the way to kind of take down bigger projects if you can't take down larger projects by yourself. But there's a large risk there's a lot of risk when it comes to development. And so you can't just think about, or developers, if I were to give them advice, isn't to just think about your own capital, but it's also the capital that you're raising. And aside from that, the worst case scenario for a developer that might not have the right plan, might not have the right team, and might not have the capital that they need for the project is that it might fail completely, and they might just crash and burn, which is the worst case scenario. And it's happened. It's happened in Toronto, where we've seen developers go bankrupt, where condominiums, new high-rise condominiums, the developers have gone bankrupt, and for one of the factors that you had mentioned. Aside from all of the reasons that you had mentioned previously, which one are you assisting or sort of helping developers more so in? Is there one more than the other, or is it a mix of all of them?
It's really a mix of all of them. I would say that it's not just developers, but it's investors as well. A client who buys suburban office buildings, and it's okay if it's only 10 or 20% occupied. If it's priced right, he's pretty good at gauging the cost to bring a property up to a current attractive standard at a reasonable rate. So that's a question of helping the client structure leases. And a lot of that information comes from brokers, but I've seen if your project is going to depend upon rents, which most real estate projects do, unless you're developing to sell. If you're developing to hold, it relies upon the rents. And I've seen some young developers quickly jump on giving incentive leases out there, sweetheart leases, so that they can get their project started. And that may be what the market is. I mean, your brokers will tell you if that's where the market is at. But I've seen some younger developers look to that fairly quickly as a way to lease up a project. And right now, if you were investing or developing suburban office buildings, you would people would be asking you why are you investing now? What is the upside here? Companies are looking at their leases right now and deciding whether to stay, whether to decrease their footprint. Will their workers be working from home? Will they be working remotely elsewhere? Will they be coming into the office 2 or 3 days a week? Do they need their own office space? Can all the office space be shared? There are a lot of those things that are going on right now. They're not legal, but they sort of are legal because it comes down to the contract, what the lease is going to say. But a lot of it is business counseling, walking and talking through the issues with a client. There are some properties that need to be repurposed. We will see a lot of properties being repurposed over the next decade. The shopping centers, malls particularly. We'll see a lot of malls repurposed. I hear plans all the time. There's a mall not too far from where I'm sitting right now, and they're converting some of their property into hotel space. So they're going to knock down where a big box department store was, and they're going to put up hotels. If the demographics are right and the location's right, maybe a hotel is right. This location lends itself to it. I've heard others discuss of converting shopping centers into senior housing. The ability for people to for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 12 months a year, be able to take a walk outside their apartment in an air conditioned, controlled environment. Heard some people look at malls. I know one in particular that's being looked at for conversion to a school. Schools are another interesting, because of COVID, that's another interesting real estate play. will the school of yesterday be able to survive the education demands of tomorrow? Will there be as many students living on campus? Will there be as many students living in town? How many students will stay at home and pay for a prestigious degree but study remotely? These things we don't know yet. We don't know yet. And so these affect the legal relationships between landlords, tenants, lenders, investors, and so on. But those relationships, which I document in transaction documents, operating agreements, joint venture agreements, a lot of that's going to be dictated by what happens to the psyche in the American workplace. Because the psyche of the American workplace will also drive what housing looks like. I think, well, you could look at New York City as an example. Many major cities where right now the office towers have a skeleton crew. Companies aren't, people aren't at working in their offices. They're working from home. And if they're going to continue working from home, are they going to continue renting in the city because they like the urban life? Or are they going to say, well, listen, I'm working from home. I want a bigger office at home. I want, you know what? I think I'd like to live out in the countryside and not have to commute. The COVID has done a lot to change the psyche and the thinking of the workplace. And again, I think that'll have a tremendous impact on housing and of course retail. With COVID, I saw clients, developers, and particularly the developers, people who were in the midst of developing projects, construction, have everything put on hold. Things were put on hold. You couldn't get permits. You couldn't get inspections. Things have improved greatly. But if you were cash strapped when COVID started to take effect, or when I should say the market started to absorb the impact of COVID, there are developers who were unable to meet their debt obligations at the bank.
Right. And it was sort of like a blessing in disguise as far as COVID goes for developers or for projects to be put on hold. Hopefully for developers that didn't have ongoing projects at the time and they didn't have to service any debt, a construction loan for their project. But the reason I say it was a blessing in disguise is because you don't really know how the virus or how COVID would have impacted the design of the final product, right? Like you said, you have to accommodate for people working at home.
Yeah, yes, you do. I'm an attorney, so I follow what goes on in the law firm market and real estate. And some major law firms have been changing their footprint. Their leases came up, or they decided to give back some space to the landlord and refit their space for a hotel type environment where you reserve an office for the days that you're going to be there. You reserve conference rooms. You book services like you would for on a hotel or a la carte basis. I see that happening. So there will be others. There's always, I find, Gary, that whenever there is disruption in the market, it's a good thing for entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurs see where arbitrage, where there can be a profit made by arbitraging the markets. They see a disconnect. They see a gap. They see a need that needs to be filled. They see new things. Right. We don't know. Listen, we don't know what the real estate construction business will look like in years to come. We don't know what buildings will look like. Everything right now is focused on green sustainability, having a carbon neutral impact. Our commercial real estate was not designed to produce positive impact in the carbon emission category. So there are many buildings that need to be looked at from an energy perspective and a waste perspective. We're going to see a lot of change over the next 10 years. We have seen a lot of change. I mean, in some markets now, we're seeing green buildings, and we're seeing a lot more. What would have been office space is now being more lab space. It's kind of exciting when there's all this lab space going on. The lab mean that there's development, there's research and development. There are new things, there's innovation coming along.
Yeah. How are you sort of helping, or what would you sort of advise developers do to mitigate any unforeseen changes or shifts in the market like that? I don't think anybody could have predicted that COVID or a virus like that. We've had viruses around the world, but I don't think anybody would have predicted that it would have had that kind of impact. Everybody was sort of waiting for another recession to happen, sort of like 2008, 2009, and that people were kind of waiting for it, and they knew that the recession might be coming, but they didn't know that it would have been a virus. But for the sake of mitigating risk, what would you sort of advise for developers to do?
Who could predict an epidemic, a pandemic? I mean, we haven't seen anything like this in my lifetime, in your lifetime.
Right.
And hopefully we'll never see anything like this again. I don't know how you can prepare adequately other than to have reserves.
Right.
It goes back to building your budget and your plan. I mean, maybe you need to overcapitalize. I don't know. I don't have the right or I don't know that there is a right or wrong answer. And maybe it would be a mistake to overcapitalize, but having a cushion would help get through periods like this. But if you are developing an office building and you are making certain assumptions, I think those assumptions may have changed, or maybe they're in a state of flux right now. So often people say, oh, find the guy with the gray hair because he has the experience, and with that experience comes the wisdom. I'm smart enough to know that the answer often lies in young people. And so what I would do in building my team, I'd make sure that I have young people who are focused on what's going on in the workplace from the millennial perspective. Because even if we didn't have COVID, many millennials who I work with, they're already accustomed to working remotely. I have found that corporate clients of mine, right now I'm negotiating a lease transaction in Salt Lake City. And one of the client doesn't know what the office of the future is going to look like, but has a presence in Salt Lake City, wants to continue having an office, wants to continue having a home for its employees, but doesn't know what the future is going to look like. And so we've negotiated 2 lease termination rights in the lease at different intervals, which allow us to go in for a long-term lease with the ability to terminate early and give back space. So from a corporate American perspective, not the developer side, but the tenant, the user side, I'm seeing, that vision, or that I shouldn't call it vision, the demand for flexibility because of the uncertainty of where things will shake out. Right. I've seen real estate comes and goes in cycles. And I think it will continue to do that. Just the cycle will just look a little different. Retail and office is hurting a little bit right now, but or maybe a lot right now. But housing's gangbusters.
It's crazy.
Housing is gangbusters.
Yeah, it's crazy what's happening. It's almost unexplainable. And I wanted to touch on a point that you made regarding hiring somebody with gray hair. In other words, with experience. I can't tell you how many people are just flabbergasted when they ask me a question and I say, I don't know. And I say, well, what do you mean? What do you know? Well, that's a question for my legal counsel, or that's a question for my partner. And majority of my team is comprised of people with decades of experience more than I have. That's for sure. And it's crucial to sort of have that dynamic. I agree where, you also look to younger people to kind of have their own experience and bring in their own experience, whether it be innovation that they're bringing to the market that is going to kind of shift the market. But at the same time, you can't get there. You can't accomplish that vision, in my opinion, or in my experience, I should say, without that experienced team to help you circumvent the waters, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's when you're experienced. I think even when you're experienced and you've done this many times and you've worked on a plan and a budget, building a team, I still think you rely on your team.
Right.
You rely on your team.
Right.
I mean, if times get tough, then your team gets small, and you're covered very thinly. You speak to your lawyer only on the essentials. You're probably spending more time with your engineers and your architects.
So if you had a piece of advice for an upcoming developer, I would imagine that the advice would sort of either be a little bit different, but it might be the same. If you had one piece of advice for an upcoming developer, an experienced developer, or sponsor, what would that advice be?
I don't think it's much different than what I said earlier. I think that they've got to learn to rely on themselves to be creative, and also pull together a team where everyone else on the team has a skill set or is brighter than the developer, so that the developer is well guided through the process. And in order to do that, you have to be well capitalized. You have to know the right people, right, and you have to be well capitalized. So raising money and knowing who you're going to raise money from is very important at the outset. At the outset, I mean, you need. I was speaking with someone yesterday who was thinking about a new project, and he's an experienced developer. He's been around the bush many times. He's developed lots of different projects, and the first thing that came to mind after he decided what he wanted to do and what he thought it would cost from a macro perspective, without getting into the details to see where things actually would cost on a value engineered basis. Right away, his mind went to, where am I going to raise capital? How much capital do I have to raise? How much debt? What is the interest of the lending community? And how much capital do I need to raise? And do I want to look for institutional money, or do I want to do this through a private syndication, selling many units to having many investors? That was the first thing that came to his mind. He didn't think about entitlements. He didn't think about building a team. He thought about cost, overall cost, and how much capital he would need to raise. Right. It goes to a point that I made earlier. If you undercapitalize and things change or aren't as expected, and you need to go find additional capital or go back to your investors, not a good position to be in. Right. Not a good position to be in.
No, definitely.
So,
not.
I mean, it goes back to being prepared, and in this case, I would say trying to avoid raising capital midstream. Try to assess what your costs are going to be conservative, and not short yourself on what's needed to develop a project.
Absolutely. If anybody asked me the same question, I'd probably tell them to call Lloyd. I just got to tell them, hey, give Lloyd a call.
You know, over 300 clients over the years, maybe more. Again, yes, I enjoy the financial rewards I get from practicing law. And from investing with clients, but I like to help people achieve their goals. And so it's when I see someone that goes into a project and they're not well capitalized, I know it's going to be heartbreaking at some point along the way. There are going to be some sleepless nights. Will we have enough money to do this? Will I need to go in hat in hand and bring in another party? How does that affect my legal relationship with all the existing investors? How much more do I have to spend on my lawyers to restructure this deal? Can my deal be restructured? Do I have to then, if I don't have enough money, do I have to cut corners? Do I have to eliminate certain things from the project? Again, not thinking out in advance far enough to predict the amount of capital you'll need is a mistake that young people and experienced people can fall into.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. It happens more often than not, unfortunately.
You know, and sometimes some people don't see, young developers don't see the relationship of it all. So that the cost to develop then has to be substantiated and underwritten for a loan, and it has to be sized properly with respect to leases for generating revenue. So, I mean, the leases feed on the financing, and the financing feeds on the cost of construction, and financing fees on the interest in investment by third parties, again, whether it's institutional or private investors. I know I said a lot here, but there's a lot to real estate. I'm looking at a project right now. For a company that's relocating from New York to Southern New Jersey, and one of the things that excites them most is the property is located in a zone where they can put additional buildings on the site, but the purchase price is perfect for them to relocate their existing business into a building that exists on the property today, and knowing that they'll have an opportunity to expand, and it won't cost them any more for the land. It'll be construction. It's zoned in such a way and in such a part of town that this particular city is pro-development. At least that's what the politics are today, pro-development.
Right.
And so they're looking at that, building that expansion building, which would be bigger than the existing building, as a tremendous development opportunity. And I'm looking at that right now, and looking at the easements, the drainage easements, the railroad spur that runs along the back of the property, and looking at how they could tie into that railroad spur. Can they build tracks on their property to get railroad cars on and off the property as a means of distributing their product? This is a manufacturing company. They manufacture parts for automobiles, plastic parts. I got excited with that. Let it get away from me for a second. But there are so many things that I do for clients with respect to real estate that it's not necessarily development. I look at title to property. I have to understand the easements, and I have to understand whether somebody has the right to build a road underneath my building or across my property, or where on the property are those easement rights.
Right.
There are so many issues in developing real estate. Environmental alone can, if you don't give yourself enough time, can really derail a project, especially if there's wetlands on the project, and the wetlands need to be delineated, and you need to get an approval, and you need to get a permit, and you need to figure out what the wetland buffers are. There's lots of little details that need to get taken into consideration and put together.
There isn't a single sort of project that is cookie cutter. I mean, like houses and townhomes and subdivisions, they might be cookie cutter, but each one of them has a different design. And then when it comes to more complex asset classes such as industrial manufacturing or malls or stadiums, they all have their nuances or difficulties. And it sounds like you're a jack of all of those, a jack of all trades and a master of all. So I love it. And it's just because you love it. If you didn't love doing this, I really don't think you'd be good, and you would have been, you'd be good at what you do, and you would have been as successful.
I like the mix of asset classes. As far as legal relationships go, contractual relationships between investors and owners and landlords, whether you're talking about industrial or commercial, you're looking at market conditions at the time, but the legal concepts are all the same.
Absolutely, right.
They are all the same, except for entitlements, obviously, because of the different dictates of what you can and can't put on a property.
Well, Lloyd, like I said, you definitely have a passion for this, and you definitely love it. And I really appreciate you taking the time today for coming on the show and talking to us about it, and sort of teaching us all the tricks of the trades that you've learned along the way. Before I let you go, tell everybody where they can find you: website, social media.
Sure. I would love to help anyone who's really young people who are setting out and have started to define their goals, and love to help people, investors, accomplished investors. I can be found on LinkedIn. Lloyd Birnbaum is my name. Birnbaum, Lloyd. My law firm is Lauletta, Lauletta Birnbaum. Again, we're a group of 20 odd lawyers And we're a business law boutique. That's all we do. And I'm on Facebook.
Nice.
And I'm on your podcast now.
Yes, you are. We'll definitely include all of the links into our show notes, so it's easy for everybody to find it. We'll be posting it.
Yeah. And my main phone number is 856.
I wouldn't be putting out a phone number, to be honest with you. If you appreciate getting quality sleep at night, or getting some rest during the day, that's for sure. I know I've given out my phone number. I've plastered it before online. It's like, no, I know there's not enough time in the day.
It's true.
It's not enough time in the day.
Yeah, because you get a lot of, what happens is, I'm a giving person. I like to think of myself as a giving person. And so people will call and go, I have a question. Can you answer a question for me? And I'll answer a question for them. And I've spent half an hour on it and I haven't billed them. They're not a client and I haven't billed them. But I enjoy giving. I enjoy helping people. So I think the opportunities come back to me because I'm giving of myself. So if people call, I usually take the call. I mean, if there's someone looking to do something in real estate, I usually take the call. Yeah. I try to avoid the calls from salesmen, but
sometimes you never know. But we'll definitely have your email there for everybody to contact you. Everybody and their mother uses email nowadays. So again, Lloyd, thank you very much for your time. It was greatly appreciated, and I look forward to doing this with you again.
Thanks, Gary. Be well.
Thank you. All the best.
Bye. Bye-bye. Okay.